This is Alicia Ruverall, and I'm with James Allen Rose and his wife Barbara Rose at their home on Harkers Island. And today's date is July 27th, 2000, and this is my tape number 72700 JR.1. Great. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about when and where you were born and how your tradition fits into the history and culture of Harkers Island.
Well, Lisa, that's the question that I really wanted to mention before our interview ended, actually. My dad was stationed in the Coast Guard on Long Island. He met up with my mom, and he brought his new bride down so the family could see his new bride. You know. Well, I was conceived here, but about halfway through my mom's pregnancy duration, she decided to go back up on the island to be with her mom and sisters till I came along. Well, then she brought me, I figure she brought me back home when I was 6 weeks old.
Brought you back home here.
Brought me back home here, you know, when I was 6 weeks old. This is the only home that I've ever known, really. This is what I call my home. Now, my dad was born up towards the middle of the island. He was born right here on Harkers Island. So I figure this is his area here. And I feel like I'm part of it, you see. Harkers Island and Carter County, North Carolina, is the only home that I know anything about. Now, when I was growing up, we made a few visits up to Long Island, and we, you know, could meet, reunite with my mom's folks and whatever, and I still have relatives on the island, cousins and whatever. The older ones have already passed away. But this is, I feel like I'm somewhat of not a misfit, that just sounds so crude, but I think that maybe I'm a Yankee, part Yankee, and with a lot of tar, with a lot of tar on the heels. I feel like I'm a pure Tar Heel. Now, that's a matter of opinion as far as others are concerned. But Wayne, when I mentioned it to Wayne on our little talk on the phone, I mentioned the fact that I was born at Southampton in the old hospital on Long Island. But I was brought back home. That's the only way I can say it, actually, when I was 6 weeks old. And I feel like I'm just part of everything. And I've taken a great interest in everything that since I was big enough to to see anything. Actually, you know, I've been very interested in our history. And the history of North Carolina seems so fascinating compared to other places, because we have so much history here. We're actually right now, you and I are sitting on the original Harker property on Harkers Island. This was the old man's part, and of course the old map shows that his two sons, one of the sons was named James and the other I can't recall right now, but they had it surveyed and off in strips. Now, this was their personal property here, you know. That's a piece of history. Now, prior to that time, and during some of their stay here, there were still Indians here. And until the white man started, the population started increasing and people moving on, and I just guess they moved away or whatever, you know. The ones that didn't just simply die out. But I don't think there's a full-blooded Corey Indian left, maybe descendants of that, but it's been a long, long time since the Indians moved. The island actually holds so much history. The original name was Craney Island because the cranes and the different white species of birds use this as their natural habitat, and it was as if the island was the only place that had gotten any snow. That went on since I was here. I noticed that Brown's Island wasn't Brown's Island at all, hardly. It was White Island with so many egret and the white heron and the white birds seemed to flock together there, and it looked as if it had snowed. They had a heavy snow all over that island, and I'm sure that Sir Walter Raleigh, in some of his earlier visits, just noticed this, and they called it Craney Island. But years after the Harkers moved here, then it went by the name of Harkers Island.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about how the tradition you carry on is connected to important traditions on the island?
Well, Harkers Island as a community started out chiefly and primarily as a fishing village, a commercial fishing village, and a boat building community. There were times when almost every male person on the island could build some sort of boat, and there's always been a fact that, and I've heard it mentioned a lot of times that in every other yard there'd be at times with some sort of a hull, being built, whatever the necessity called for. They'd build that type hull to use in their commercial work. And everything from just a plain, simple skiff for transporting goods from shore to the larger vessel, or to little open commercial boats, powered boats. In the beginning, it was all under sail, everything went by sail. But eventually they started motorizing the boats, and that became a much faster operation. But necessity might call for a special built beach dory. Well, there were a number of people who could build dories, and so there was no problem in having a dory. Larger craft for carrying the catch and whatever, they had to be considered. They had to have a larger craft, to bring the catch into the market and whatever. So that called for a larger hull, and they went about building the larger ones.
So the design changed as the needs changed.
That's right,
Yeah.
exactly. Whatever the need was, they would build a design to meet that need. I built skiffs. I built little open power boats. I built on up to 40-foot hulls right here in the yard myself. I estimated around 75, perhaps, with counting everything I've ever done.
Of the large boats.
That's right, with full-size boats.
Yeah.
From small skiffs on up to little dead-rise boats, little flower bow boats, right on up to the 40-foot class. Now they can go anywhere from say 32 feet to actually 40 feet. But it's almost the same job, the same amount of work has to be done, one or the other. And they're considered 40-foot class boats. But it only has to be, say, 36 foot or whatever. But they're required to be on file at the custom house. They have to go, through. They have to meet certain requirements, and they come under regulations, the Coast Guard requirements and regulations. If they're considered of the 40-foot class, they go on file of that class. Now in the mid-40s, they had to decide a name for our most outstanding hull design of Harkers Island. She's the closest hull to be called Miss Harkers Island of any other hull, and this is the quarter-sided round stern mackerel fishery. That is the most outstanding hull that was ever built in the area. And right now, it's so traditional that right now people would just love to have one of those. There are possibly 4 or 5 left of the old designs, and Mr. Bob Simpson has the old Sylvia, which was that came from the more original design, and he had it redone completely. And some of the boys up the road here, they took the job and they redid it for him, and he's so happy with it. He just talks about it all the time. And by the way, he was with the local newspaper. He's a writer, and I think he partly claims he's a poet or whatever. But nevertheless, he's a very nice fellow. He's very a gentleman, you know.
Yeah.
That has to be appreciated.
Right. Well, you've probably been interviewed a lot, I would assume, about your family's boat building history. Is that so?
That's right.
Have you talked about
Yeah,
that?
I have. I've sat through a number of interviews. You know, now Terry Zug, Professor Zug, I sat through 7 recorded interviews
Oh my goodness.
with Terry.
Yeah, I knew he'd interviewed you.
But
Your best.
it was as much interesting to me as it was to him. So, and it was real nice having him as a guest and the interview too. But he has helped me a great deal because he's made several publications with access to the university press and whatever, you know. He's done a lot of work there, and but he all at the same time he claims that I've helped him more than I can realize. And I wondered about that. I said, well, it's nice if I could help.
Yeah.
But I wonder if I've helped him as much as he helped me, you know.
Well, the door swings both ways.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. That's right. And you know, Alicia, I read the book several times, one of the little books.
The Little Boats booklet.
The Little Boats book. And there's not one single word or dot out of place. He knows his job. He knows what he's doing. There can be, there's always a chance of a slight misunderstanding, but that can be corrected. But he didn't require much of that, not in our discussion, because he knew how to put the words together. He'd get the meaning. And just edit it, put it together.
Right. And I actually, because I'm a big model boat fan, I'd love to interview you and talk more about that. What we're trying to do here, in some ways, is to look at what you do and how it fits into the tradition of boat building and also carving. And
well, that's right.
How does what you do connect to
the
history here?
Model boat building actually goes way, way back. Now, I've seen a few times, I've seen some real old pieces that some of the old timers had built. And they didn't have anything much to work with, so they had to whittle or chop out everything, and you could actually see the knife marks on their work, which that is very, and that can make a piece very outstanding. Because say something like 75 years ago, there's his knife marks on that particular piece. They did a lot of different carving. It wasn't always restricted to model boat building. They'd carve out a little dog, or they'd carve them out of pipe that you could actually smoke, you know.
And how far back do you remember hearing about or knowing about that kind of carving?
When I was anything like 7 and 8 years old, I would think, you know, because
that would have been roughly.
It was the old stories and whatever was so fascinating that I've actually caught myself sitting in a group of old fellers and listening to their stories and whatever. The model boats is a direct connection to our heritage simply because they had to have a boat to survive, you know. Now, in the earliest days, travel through the wilderness was impossible in some places. My granddad said when he was a boy, said that they were lucky to have some sort of sail rig so they could move from village to village on the water. He said it's possible that if you were to take out through the wilderness just between Atlantic and Smyrna, you'd never make it. You'd never be heard of after that, because it was an impossibility to move through wilderness. And so they just go down to the water's edge and step aboard their rig, and they're on their way.
Mm.
It was so handy, you know. but he remembers right many different things that happened around that time, but they were highly dependent on the water and their boats for their survival. Survival was a big word there around the turn of the century. And if we had been here at that time, we could see them coming and going. It was a natural thing. They were going from one point to the other to harvest clams, oysters, and scallops, and whatever the going thing was. And that was his bread and butter, so to speak. That was his whole livelihood there. It was taken from the water. Now the ladies would actually they'd actually make net, and then when the fellas on an off time, they would string up the lines and hang a number of yards that the ladies had made. They actually made the nets on different size skids for different size mesh, and they'd make a row of meshes, and it was temporarily hung by a line in order to hold it in place.
Right.
And they would walk right back and forth a number of yards until they had the depth of the net in a number of meshes down. They would make out, if they wanted it 40 meshes deep, they worked until they had done 40 meshes and 20 yards,
Right.
perhaps.
Right. Yeah.
That would be just sewn right on to another piece, maybe 20 yards.
Right. So they piece them together.
They
to make
pieced
the
them
whole
together
net.
until they made what they call a set gill net, and they would go down and work poles down in the bottom, and they leave a little branch sticking out so they could tie on, to actually hang the cord line of the net on as it went on down, and they were called set nets. They set for trout. Once in a while, a flounder would entangle in it, and it wasn't a large catch, but it sustained them. I guess it was good enough that they managed with it.
Right. Did you ever make any miniatures of nets at all? Have you ever thought about doing that?
I can do it, but it's very, very time consuming, you know. And what happens is I can't get the right material. With all these new plastics and whatever, it's just too stiff. The webbing is too stiff, you know. If I had some soft.
Yeah. I can make you a copy of this. I will, definitely. Yeah.
But the boats, the full size boats and widely used for different types of fishing, along with the model boats, it just sort of maintains our history. It keeps it all evident, you know, as to what happened long ago. We need to know where we came from.
Right.
We pretty well know where we're at, but no one knows where we're going now.
Right.
I'd like to think of a good ending in all of it, but I don't know.
What drew you to both the boat building and the model making from that, especially thinking about the historical piece?
Well, when you go way back to the Sharpies, and schooner type rigs, smacks. Of course, they didn't venture very far offshore, you know. And when the weather started getting up, the local people would try to make harbor. But we had some Norwegians that came down with a larger seagoing smack, and they would fish for the black sea bass offshore on our rocks, you know. And when the weather started picking up, getting bad, they'd head offshore to ride it out. There was a great difference there and on the outlooks of things. But the the different designs played a big part. Different design hulls like that played a big part in our existence.
Right.
You know.
But you've done a lot of boat building, and obviously the model boats. Why do model boat building? Why does it matter? Why should that be a tradition to be carried on?
Well, a tradition can very easily be forgotten. And it's like a revival to me, you know. If I can ever so often build a certain design, it brings it all back to mind, you know. And as long as there's something there as a reminder, we'll never forget our past, you know. We keep it alive.
So it's kind of like sort of a touchstone, a reminder of another time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I've often thought that I'd like to go back 300 years, you know, and talk to some of the earlier folks, you know, but only for about a week.
Yeah.
And then try to hurry back, you know.
Right.
But I've often wondered, you know, how great-great-great-granddad looked at things, and
Does
how
it,
the conditions were, how they had to, what they had to do to survive. As early as my granddad in history, he was a great seaman. He was a great seaman. He knew what to do on a boat, more so than actually building one, you know. But see, he went as a captain on a freight hauling sail rig that sailed from Atlantic to Ocracoke and Newbern. When he was 17 years old, he went as master on the rig. And that went on for just a few years because his son got married, you know. He was 22 years old when they got married in 1899. My grandma was 13, I believe, was she? They robbed a cradle in those days. And they were married.
Yeah.
My birthday is the 5th of January. And they were married the 5th of January in 1899. And they had a very large family. My dad had 3 other brothers, and four sisters, wasn't it? And Virgie, Mary, and Edith, and Annie. There were actually 8 that lived. They cared for their family. But now, when my granddad and grandma were courting, he sailed down in the one behind her in the 1880s and 1890s. Course on right stern, flat bottom, inverted rake, stem, Sharpie.
The Judy Ann.
That's an order waiting to be picked up, but that's the name they gave me to put on it.
I see, but it's that design.
They didn't really go by names in those days. Hardly ever thought about naming them. The only thing was the larger rigs. They had their name. And my great-granddad, on his 2-masted schooner, I have no idea what her name was before, but he eventually named her the Sarah Wallace after one of his sisters, Sarah Wallace Rose. He named her after his sister, the Sarah Wallace, and that's what I'm working on out there now, Alicia.
So,
It's going to be a real smooth job compared to the real thing, the original stuff.
be a cleaner finish. And,
Everything, you know,
Yeah,
everything was so crude.
Yeah. Well,
I've seen the remains up at Swanquarter. I saw the remains of an old Eastern ram stern schooner, the stern part of it, and as it went, it had muddied up, and it was head down in the canal, and the stern was all up where you could walk around on it, but the rest of it was gone. And I said, "Oh man, some fancy work here. Those turnings and all that, you know,
Right.
under the rails and all that." I said, "That is some fancy work." I was 12 years old at the time. Well, I came on home, and one of our trips over at Beaufort on this, we went to the machine shop. My dad did to get some work done, and while we were there, I just walked on up the street, and I noticed over and pulled up on the edge of the shore was one flat bottom ramps, I never erased them sharply.
That was pretty quick.
But everything was exact like Granddad said.
Uh-huh.
I said, I've got it now. And it was like I had found a gold nugget,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, that
I
holds
was
a piece
in-
of your past. That
I was
nugget.
wondering about this or that, some certain segments of the construction and everything parts. And I said, that is exact. This is what I saw. It was all painted white. Everything was white on it. This is what I saw pulled up in Beaufort. But I was around 12 years old. You know.
Wow.
Several little things happened around that age, 12 to 15, you know. That was very helpful.
And what year would that have been?
Well, when I was 12, it would be 1947. That would be 1947 because the Rose Brothers was brand new at the time. She was built. She was built in 47, a little earlier, you know. Than,
Yeah.
the end of the year was coming up, and they wanted it if they could have gotten it for that particular pole station, but it wouldn't. Time wouldn't allow it. So it had to have the cabin, all the cabin, all the trim.
Right.
The interior had to be done. So my dad was just him and Clem over here together. My uncle by marriage, he married my dad's sister Edith. Them two got together and they put in all the rest of the work on the hull. Now Mr. Bernie Gillikin over at Lower Smyrna built the hull for him because they were shrimping on the old J&M Lewis, an real old boat that my granddad had bought from a fellow in Moorhead. The old thing was about to come apart, and he had to work on it to keep it going, and he had to haul it out at least every other Saturday to recaulk part of it or something to stop the leaks,
Right.
and try to keep it going until he could get him a real rig. You know, like that.
So there are all these stories that are all connected to
All
these boats.
connected to the boats.
It sounds like from what you were saying before that the models both reach toward next generations because it maintains the tradition, but it also connects you to the past.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Now, my dad, even though he went in the Coast Guard at a very early age, and then out of the Coast Guard into the lightship service. He was on the Savannah lightship down here, and finally in 1938 they issued him a certificate stating what his role was on the vessel, but he was an oiler in the engine room.
Interesting. Yeah.
That was his job in the engine compartment, and which is a room, I guess twice as big as this, and an enormous piece of iron there. They had the original engine was a steam engine, a large steam engine, and they took it to Norfolk, I understand, and they changed from steam to diesel. And it was diesel when my dad was on one of the earlier diesels, and that was still a massive piece of iron. You know, he's often talked about it. They had the lower level to service the engine, and of course they had an upper catwalk. He called it an upper level to service the upper part of the engine. So there's no doubt it was a big thing. You know.
Ever thought of making a model of it?
Yes, I have, really, Alicia,
Yeah.
and it is included in my repertoire.
Yeah.
Is the Diamond Shoals lightship and the Savannah lightship.
Right.
That's included in. They're very similar hulls. It's amazing how one hull looks like the other. You know, for a period of time, a number of years, it follows practically the same design. It's like if you see one lightship, you see them all. You know, that approach. But they're very similar hulls. I think I could put Diamond Shoals on one and turn it, change it around, and put it Savannah on it. But they're very similar. Crude design, really. You know, of the time. But it was highly seaworthy. My dad says that he'd experienced some bad weather out there, and they often wondered if the morning was going to hold, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Laying there, it said the sea just piled up on her, you know.
Yeah.
This is about 160, 180 feet in length.
Wow.
But it's a buoy. It's both a radio beacon and a light beacon to ward the ships off of the shoals and whatever. That's the function of it, actually.
Right.
It's like just a great large buoy that's livable. I mean, you know, a crew of about 18 men. So there were times when the weather was so bad they couldn't get the Liberty boat out to it, and he had to pull another watch. And the longest time he stayed on it was 17 days. And he said the seasickness was a great part of that. You know, he said he had to work when he was really. He felt he was sick enough to be in the hospital.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I bet.
Because seasickness, you
Yeah.
might have been seasick a few times. It's one of the worst feelings I can imagine.
Yeah.
I've often said I've died several times, you know, in one day's time.
In one day's time, that's great.
It's a terrible feeling.
Well,
But historically, the wooden boats is a big part of our history, our heritage. You know. It played a very, very large part in the very early people's existence.
Right, right.
Well, if it had not been for boats, the pilgrims would have not made it.
Right. None of this would have happened.
And the ancestors,
Right.
they put ashore up and down the coast. Jamestown, perhaps, and even in Dyer County, history has that some of the earlier ones landed in Dyer County. How did they get, unless the wind was off the land when they made their landing?
Right.
How did they get to Roanoke Island without, picking their chances?
Without taking a chance.
Yeah.
Well, given that this is the Core Sound Waterfowl Museum, how does model boat building have a place in that? I mean,
The hunters, there used to be almost an influx of hunters that came from inland down to the coast to simply go hunting. And they had their duck blinds placed out on some of the grassy shoals in Core Sound. And they had to have some sort of a boat to get out to the blinds. They had their guides and people to take them out to their blinds, leave them for a number of hours, along with their equipment and decoys and whatever, The boat played an important part there. Now, they, through someone's experimentation, they built sink boxes and they built scows that served as floating blinds, and they were rigged in such a way that they could fasten short branches, bushes and branches around the outside rail to form a floating blind. And they would anchor that blind out in the middle of the sound. And of course, their decoys would tow the ducks into them, and it worked quite well. And but actually, it was just another type boat.
Right.
We have a scow, pram, dhow, dory, a number of different designs there. And the sink box was, you can't very well call it a boat. It was a box. But the floating blind, that called for either a scow built for that or a flat bottom skiff. They use those too. And some of them would try to camouflage the hull as to not to distract the birds, and whatever, to make it look like a part of the environment.
Well, you got me convinced on the connections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there've been a lot of enjoyable times, for some of our outstanding figures in Babe Ruth came down whenever he got a chance to break away. He'd come down, and he knew a lot of the local people here. They were
Right.
friendly and whatever. And he liked that, but he liked to get out there where the ducks and geese were, And in one of Lynn Saucy and Francis Eubanks, one of the publications, I got a copy of it anyway. There's a picture in there showing Babe Ruth along with his friends, and they have their geese and ducks strung up, hanging up there for the picture.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he had doing big hunting, doing good hunting.
Yeah.
The
Great.
different ones, the older ones remembered his being in the area, But I think most of those people have already passed on.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That was in, I understand, in the late 20s and somewhat into the 30s or something like that, Babe Ruth. But, Theodore Roosevelt, he'd been down, he looked the area over.
Right. Drew a lot of people.
And the family bought some property up, part of Shoulder Path and Indian Base along in there, That was considered Roosevelt property.
Right.
So that's a little piece of history.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, thinking about all the different ways in which the sound has been used, kind of the stretch of Down East. What do you consider Down East? What does Down East mean to you?
Well, a lot of people say anything east of Beaufort, NC, would be considered down east. Now, our governor has stated that anything east of Raleigh is down east. Well, to him, I suppose it might appear that way, But what we say, we feel anything east of Beaufort would be down east. Naturally, it goes right on to No Man's Land, Cedar Island, and Okotoks.
Yeah.
No Man's Land. That's the last jumping off place,
Right.
So we had a trip over to Hatteras planned for yesterday or today, and the weather was so bad they changed their mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
My
Yeah.
friends from up Pilot Mountain.
Right.
And
What about culturally? What do you think makes up Down East?
well, in the very, very start of things, the remaining few Indians that were here, they married and intermarried. So there's descendants that probably are part Indian here in the area, and they don't fully realize it. But some of the early visitors noticed that the Indians here on the island and on the Core Banks, some of them had blue eyes and blonde hair. That was from an earlier visitor, perhaps, but nevertheless, they were very friendly. They were real friendly Indians, a very friendly tribe. Now, the Tuscaroras were a more warlike group, and they would send these scouting parties down to check on the Coreys to see what is it about the Corey that he's here and he's healthy and everything looks real good here. But they were here where they had plenty of seafood, wildfowl, anything they wanted to eat. All they had to do was grab it and eat it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas the inland Indian, he had to, with a bow and arrow, try to shoot a squirrel, and it's not easy.
Right.
Or a rabbit, whatever. A deer now is a bigger target. But see, they had to work so hard in order to survive. And the local people here, the local Indians here, they had everything they needed. I mean, it was like they had died and gone to heaven. And I think the inland Indians were somewhat envious of the people. And now history I can't find it, or I never heard of anyone even mention about finding it in print. But about 20 years ago, maybe that far back, 15, Mr. Mac Piggott over on the Straits, over in Gloucester, after a bad spell of weather, he was walking down on the shore, and and the sea had washed out the bank. And he started noticing these bones, remains sticking out of the bank. He goes right away and notifies the sheriff's office. The sheriff comes down, gives it a look, and goes back and makes some calls to Raleigh to get up with some of our top pathologists. They came down and they went out and they dug up 50-something remains of the Tuscarora Indians, as far as they could determine on the skulls, what was left of the skulls.
Wow.
They evidently had a skirmish because that envy had really eventually turned into enough anger that a war party came down, and they must have had some sort of skirmish that it's not down in history. But it looks very much that way. They wouldn't bury them here on the island. They took them over to the mainland, and they buried the dead from what I call a skirmish. This is all my imagination now, you know,
Right.
which can run wild.
Your recounting of the culture and
Yeah,
history.
yeah, that's right.
Well, what about
And the people, there were settlers here, actually people that settled here, the Harkers chiefly, you know. But they also settled all up the Outer Banks and over at the Diamond City on up the Shackleford Banks. I figured it was maybe prior to the 1800s, like in the late 1700s, as best I can recall. And they built communities over on the Outer Banks. And from those communities came a number of people that late in the 1800s, in 1889 and 1898 and 1900, there were three major hurricanes that forced the people off of the Outer Banks. They had to find a shelter place somewhere, you know, so they made their exodus starting as early as 1900 and on through about 1910. I think most of them had moved some had moved their homes over on the island at Beaufort and Morehead City, and reassembled them, you know. They came by Sharpies and barges and whatever, you know, to bring the house. Some said they would take one end of the house and enough men and place it across two Sharpies and bring it over that way, so they could stand it up and refasten it, you know. Some of the old homes. I don't. Right now, I don't know of any remaining houses on the island, because Mr. Fred Guthrie's was one that was moved from Diamond City. Mr. Stacy Guthrie, deceased. They're both gone now. He brought his house from Diamond City. Helped his dad bring the house over and reassemble it right up the island here. And I seen the old house. But after the old man died, Joseph, one of his boys there, had it all cleaned up, and that was adjoining to his lot. So, in a sense, it was left to Joseph, I guess.
Well, given that kind of history, you know, that kind of tenacity, what makes folks on Core Sound unique? I mean, that's an unusual. So we were talking about what makes
People around the Core Sound area are so unique.
Yeah.
It's simply because they have been confronted with, like I stated before, Mother Nature. You know, they've been very closely knit to nature and had to survive on that. You know, if anyone ever became hungry, it was because he just lay down and gave up, because there's always been an abundance of food here in this area. Now the people it was as if they were almost as closely connected to nature as a seagull, because they had to take advantage of live off of the fat of the land, so to speak, for their survival. And they take on an attitude that all this is so important, and that's what, like their parents, their grandparents, like that, they had it. If it had not been for the plenty of food and whatever, it would not have worked out anyway. Because we used to figure that if we had to deal with the weather, that became a problem at times, because you could only work, say, half of the week, because the rest of the week would be stormy and whatever. We'd rather not bother with it.
Yeah.
And that determined just what you could accomplish, the weather. But the people are unique in the sense that they came from some of the earlier what was considered the late settlers, because the earlier settlers were what took place all during the 1500s. Now, after 1600 on into the 1600s, they were considered late settlers. But some of these people are descendants from the settlers, actually, late settlers, and they had to make it work, they had to shoot their game, and had to catch what fish they could for their existence, and it made a very sturdy race of people. They're very sturdy and dedicated to those kind of conditions. Very, very strictly dedicated there, and they appear to be somewhat unique, somewhat different than others. But I'm sure that some of the hardships and whatever they had to endure, that left a mark on them, some are very hospitable, some are very friendly, and some are so withdrawn from things. They'd rather not talk about this. They'd rather not talk about something else, But a socialite is very, very different there. We have a variety of people with different outlooks and whatever.
Right.
But most of the older ones, they appear to be very friendly, although they had a very crude life up to this point. But they'd always hang together. If something needed to be done, they were all there to do it.
Yeah.
No one was left alone on his own to do something major.
Right. So interdependent. They were connected to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were very close. There up until, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 years ago. Things started loosening up some. But nevertheless, if one needed help, they were always there, glad to help.
What about your community as opposed to other Down East communities? How does it compare?
There's really not a big difference. The dialect would be somewhat different, because in each community you can notice a slight difference in the dialect. But basically, it's broken Old English, Elizabethan English, and we actually say our words clearer if we slow down a little bit than most others. We do say our words as the word sounds. And a lot of people say, those people talk awful funny in this area. They talk so funny and whatever. But we try to say our words like the word was made. I mean, M-A-D-E, made, not made, or whatever you say. Some of us try to move away from the old dialect try to speak as clearly as we can. Some just right around that old thing, you know, like that, and keep on going like that there,
Right.
and you don't know a word he says. But everybody has their own dialect wherever you want to go.
Yeah, it's part of a place. It's part of a culture.
Some are very plain. They speak very plain, and some places they don't speak all that plain. I can give you an example if you like.
Sure.
And it's no more than a joke to me. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of anybody. Of course, I love everybody. But I can pretty well explain what a person from Rocky Mount sounds like, you know. And this little old fella, he walks up to a group of local boys up in one of the stores one evening and says, you know, said, I got to go back home to get my backer in. He said, but you know, I'd like to come back down here and go fishing with y'all. But there's one thing I want to tell you before I go. He said, you know, you all talk so funny down here. And I was wondering who was talking funny or not, you know. But there's several, from several different locations, you know. You're going to notice, you can almost tell where they're from, you know. And,
Within the Down East communities as well?
that's right, and there's a difference in each community here, slightly. Now, to Atlantic, that's just about as crude dialect as you'll find is from Atlantic. Now, my granddad was born and raised on Atlantic. My grandma was born and raised at Marshallburg. Marshallburg, they try to say their words pretty clear, but they don't do too good a job at it, you know. They still hang on to the old dialect. But down there in Atlantic, son, I tell you right now, son, the winds of the southwest is talking on tour, you know, and the damn thing sunk. I can't get the darn thing bailed up.
Right.
It said, if ever been asleep, it's right now, son. That's Atlantic.
Yeah.
Cedar Island is a lot like this, like Atlantic. And for the old Ocracokeers, they're somewhat removed from Cedar Island. But they have that little difference, really, they do have a little difference in the dialect.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it all, you know. I don't look at those superficial things as much as I do into the character of people, and if they show good character, well, I learn about it from right start.
How would you describe good character?
Well, being agreeing to maybe listen to the other man's problem or whatever, you know, instead of being all self, you know, and that sort of thing. If we're too selfish, then we don't show very good character. You know, I have to be interested in your well-being as much as hers, you know, so I wouldn't want anything, any discomfort to come to you any more than I would her, see. So that might be a
would be
good
good
sign of
character.
character.
Is there a particular kind of Down East character or qualities that you would describe? What makes a Down Easter?
Oh man, it's a real combination of things that makes a true Downeaster. I mean, he's been through all the experiences, and it's like a potter gonna make a certain shape base. For instance, this base is different than all of that, you know. But what that comes from is being kind of all their experiences and whatever. It develops a certain outlook on life as a whole. Something that might look okay to you is a catastrophe to them, maybe. You know what I'm saying? Like in government or whatever, you know, they're going to go about it in a certain way, you know, like that. And man, it's a catastrophe. It's the way he looks at it, whatever. But what is good for all would be better than something a law made just specifically for him. And these people have to go hungry, you know. You know what I'm saying? But
So when you're saying that Downeasters, are they concerned about one another? They have that care for
Oh, yeah.
each other? Yeah.
oh yeah, yeah. according to the community, and there's certain groups, you know, that would hang together if it's a life or death thing. And it and in another group, you wouldn't have to say much of anything, be out of the way, and you notice you've got more company just to check it out. One has to be careful in that sort of atmosphere, you know. But as a whole, generally, these people seem to be quite normal. I mean, there's not a big difference in the people from one community to the other.
You mean within Down East?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
down
exactly.
We're speaking now, say
Yeah.
east of Moorhead.
Right, right.
Because there are some down easters living in Moorhead, you know. They came from the old original folks. Miss Nettie Merle came from the Lewis and Willis families. She just passed away a couple weeks ago, I guess now. She was an outstanding figure in the whole area. Miss Nettie, she was a natural historian. She could actually tell you dates on certain things that happened. And I found her very interesting, and oh my, it was an honor to be in her presence. She was, we lost a real outstanding lady, you know, from our area. And we went over to the funeral, great service. We sent her a big flower wreath, a Coastal Playboys. You know, we had a nice big wreath made up special for Miss Nettie. She loves our music so well, and she had her certain songs. There was one most outstanding song, Song of Old San Antonio.
Song, what was that?
San Antonio Road.
San Antonio Rose.
And the next one was Indian Love Call. Those are the two songs, but San Antonio Rose, that stood out more than anything else. She'd come up and say, "Come play my song now." And I'd crank right up on it right there. I had to do it, you know, or else.
Yeah. Great.
But she'd been out there trying to dance. She was 98. We had her 98th birthday right here, you know, for us. And
89th birthday?
89th, I said
Correction from
98.
Barbara.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
89th birthday.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But they fixed up a couple cakes for her, and we played her music special. I got them here just for Miss Nettie.
Nice.
Played
Great.
music for Miss Nettie.
Good.
She loved it. She sat right there, right alongside of me, and scrooched up to me, you know, they're playing the guitar. And of course, I encouraged that right much. I kind of leaned over there toward her. I said, "You know what this one is for coming up?" And, no. I said, "Well, listen now." I started up on that Indian Love Call. And she said, "Oh my, ain't that pretty?" She said, she went over to me,
Yeah.
sitting right there.
Yeah.
I had my tray right here, and everybody thought we were on Miss Nettie. It's nothing like an outstanding person, you know.
Right.
You don't soon forget them. I won't. I didn't be 200. I think I'll remember her. You know.
Right. Let me ask you this: how do you think the museum can represent some of these different stories? You know, music, the different traditions we've talked about here. What would you recommend?
Well, now, Alicia, pictures say a whole lot. If you had some sort of mural in each section of the museum, if you had a mural depicting, say, a floating blind, as far as hunting goes, a floating blind, maybe a few ducks overhead, the decoys placed out. This is in the background now. Now, as far as the display, if someone has a real old gun they'd like to donate, some real old shells and maybe brass casings and that sort of thing. Something really old because, after all, it's a museum. And a bunch of implements, necessary for hunting, powder horns or anything, anything of historical value, have that on display, and it'd be like in a section. Each thing would have its separate section. That's the way I would see
Each thing meaning each different tradition, or
each thing that's represented, each representation, would have a different setting like that, and in a different area in the museum itself.
if there were,
Like if something to cover the Civil War in the area, you could have a mural depicting a certain engagement, cannon, the infantry, whatever, the implements of the war to make up the mural, and on display you have bayonets, muskets, whatever, going thing. That would pretty well represent the Civil War era in our area,
so artifacts that represent,
that represent these different headings, like or happenings or whatever, and when it comes, but this is a waterfowl museum, so what we have to do is to sort of stay with the things that are most that describe the history of the waterfowl, the whole operation overall. If someone had even a piece of an old sink box or an old floating blind, anything, that could be placed on display there. Hunting, in one sense of the word hunting. Another sense of the word hunting would be some other different approach to it, like the different type equipment, like from a different era, to do their hunting, and maybe an old mural describing that. It can all be put together that way, but it all will have to do with the museum itself.
I mean, with the waterfowl
The waterfowl, exactly.
What,
That's ridiculous.
and when you're saying mural, are you meaning like photos, or are you meaning like a whole, like a painting that illustrates, or?
A large painting, actually, what it would be, in the background, and that would stand out. And here are the artifacts that describe that painting.
I see.
The ducks, the old blinds, and the decoys placed. A dog, perhaps, looking on, or whatever,
And so the mural, would that be the setting, like the back, what it would look like, and then the artifacts would be
when these
sort of
artifacts
pieces of
were
it.
used.
Interesting, neat.
That's what the picture would tell you. See, the picture tells you just how these artifacts were used.
Right.
I think that would be a perfect setup.
Interesting.
Now, some local artists would have to work in order to produce these large paintings, but nothing fancy, just in order to get the idea. So look at this, and look at him, and he shot a duck, and the duck is on his way down, and just a description of what these things were used for.
Now, what about, you're a boat builder and a musician and a model maker. Where would your story fit into that?
Well, when I was a lot younger, I had a few decoys, and I'd take a little boat, and I'd go over and have my blind made over on one of the small islands or whatever, and I did a little duck hunting, and I can see the enjoyment in it. I enjoyed it, what I was doing for a little while, but where I got some enjoyment out was marsh hunting. I take my gun and I walk through the marsh and brown bird that, I don't know the scientific name for him, but we call them marsh hens.
Huh.
And they would hide in clumps of grass, you know. And when they jumped, you got to get him now or he'd be gone, you know. So I became pretty good with that, you know. I just, down he goes, you know.
Right.
It was like that.
Right. But I
And
was,
I got a lot of enjoyment in just walking along with my gun, you know.
right.
They weren't as heavy protected then as they are now.
Right.
We don't want to become extinct, you know.
Right, but I mean, beyond the hunting that you've done, where do your traditions fit into the museum? Is there a place for traditions beyond
That would be
waterfowl?
that would be the closest connection that I'd have with
Right.
with the museum.
Right.
You know, just a little bit of hunting I did. Although I built boats, and there was a time when they take almost any type of boat and to take the hunting crews out
Right.
to the grounds, you know.
Right.
And they certainly played a part because you had to have boats before you could hunt. See.
Well, a number of the people that I've talked to think that the museum should be about waterfowl, but that there should be other traditions represented.
Well, I felt that way myself, you know, because if it's too confined to ducks, birds, and whatever, I don't think we have to have a building as large as that just to cover that. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
In just one corner
Right.
would take care of ducks and
Right.
birds and whatever,
Right.
you know.
Right. Yeah.
But no, I think it should be the Waterfowl Museum, along with maybe anything of historical value and natural history, maybe you know, and have it placed all over the museum.
What would the traditions that you think should be highlighted along with waterfowl?
Well, what would really make me happy is for them to have a very large painting of some of the old commercial fishermen, you know, when they come in, you know, and they finish for the week, and they're pulling their nets on the net spreads, you know, and they can hardly wait to get home to get a bite to eat, and they've got the old flashy clothes on and an old flop hat and a knee boot. You know, make it look very authentic. I think we might have a few artists in the area that could do that work.
That's a neat idea.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then have a string of corks, a line with lids on it, buoys, a piece of net hanging all around.
That's exactly what I've heard.
Starfish or whatever, shells hanging all in it, all around this one booth, like, you know, and that would be natural history. You can't call it much anything else, you know.
Right, right.
And with this big painting here, and here's great grandpa over here, you know, he's doing his thing, and another fellow bending down picking something up, and here they come ashore in the dory rowing. I mean, from off, and there's a larger vessel offshore of that, and oh man, you can make a real picture of that, you know.
Yeah, great.
I mean, I think that would be outstanding. Sure, we'd have a lot of spectators. They stand there and say, "Oh my, now this is what they use." Now I can make an old baler, water baler that would look old enough, you know, just to place in there. They're welcome to it, you know. And well, that's what they scoop the water out of the dory with. You know. Man, I've done it until my arm hurt, you know, because we have to pick our chances when to put out. You know, on account of the break of the sea. Beach hauling, you know, working on the beach. You know. I got in right on the last end of that, thank God. And that's the hardest work any human has ever done. And, but to see them in, and they use very, very harsh words and very crude. And lewd is the word. To get the crew to do their job.
Yeah.
And I don't care to use that language, but But it's my pull, man, pull, you know.
Yeah.
To pull that seine out of that door to go around those fish, you know.
So how do
Now here's the school of fish. You got to get that. You got to get it going around there. And there's 4 oarsmen, and they're really built, you know. This is their biceps. And they're sturdy, you know. And those 16-foot ice oars are not easy to handle from with a little fella, you know.
right?
And someone would break those oars like you. I mean, they got excited. But that's what made it all work, is the excitement.
How could you depict that?
Yeah,
How could you depict that? How could you show that at the museum? That kind of
don't
excitement.
know.
That's
I don't know.
hard.
The sea just broke over in my face, and I can't see you guys. Well, now, the salt, you know.
Right.
I don't know. It's
That's tough.
yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
how to describe right down in detail a thing like that. You'd have to be there in a sense.
Right.
You know?
So yeah.
And sometimes we didn't have such good luck, and we'd sink the dory on the beach. So we'd have to work it up as far as we could. And they get there and they just bail the water out, you know. Get the water out of it and almost get it all out, and then turn the whole dory over and dump the remaining part of the water out, put it back.
And what kind of fishing were you doing?
We were holding for trout, the speckled trout, the channel bass, they call it now, but we call them red drown. Some gray trout, a few flounders mixed up in it like that. But chiefly the spotted trout,
Right.
speckled trout.
So, if there were 3 rooms in the museum, what should be the traditions represented in those 3 rooms?
Well, the actual a day in the life of an old commercial fisherman would be one of the rooms should be of that, and the other the different methods of hunting going way back to the earlier times, right on up to the present time, the implements that they had to use in hunting. That would be the other one. Full description, and like I say, on the back wall, perhaps a large painting of what went on with these implements. You see. Now, music, the musical aspect. You can have a bunch of old fiddles, no matter what condition it is. A bunch of old fiddles or any musical instruments, and then have a large painting of several little groups of people clustered together, playing their old cigar box fiddles or whatever, you know, and just making merriment, you know. That would be real. That would be pretty to me, anyway. And someone just standing there, just singing away, you know.
So some people actually performing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And then one through the motion of a tap dance or whatever, you know, they would do. But basically, it would outline the times from the past, times gone by, when they would get together and have their little musical sessions. They also played for square dances, you know. They would have square dances, you know. Tommy, my #1 rhythm man, as a boy of 15, a young feller, he went with Ivy Scott over to Cape Lookout, and the 2 of them played for square dances when he was only around 15, 16 years old. He'd go with his uncle Ivy Scott and play for square dances. They'd come from all around Marshallburg, Beaufort, and the island, you know, and they all head for Cape Lookout, going over to the big dance celebration.
Great.
And they'd go there to Miss Carrie Reynolds had a place over there that was a store and a large area, screened in area where they could dance and perform in there, you know. I've been in that place when I was real little. I'd go up to the store and buy candy and stuff, you know. They had these popcorn wheels that are about this size and about this thick. It's like Cracker Jack. and only was made into a wheel.
Into a well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I'd let you get in. They were nickel a piece.
Huh. What about the third room? What would the third room be?
Well, oh man, they had to make everything that they did. They had to make their own nets. Anything that was used commercially, they had to make it.
Yeah.
Had
So
to
all of
build it,
those,
you know.
all those pieces that were part of the fishing tradition.
Part of the fishing tradition, you know, have all those old pieces. Anybody, a thing laying out in the edge of the woods, you know, that's never going to be used. And, oh man, it's a perfect example of what happened 75 years ago. You know, so, that should go in there one way or the other, you know.
Right, right.
We'll get the lieutenant governor down here and tell him, no, that's got to be moved. You got to take it down here to, or something, you know.
Right,
Put on the shed
Yeah.
anyway. But you can have the different influence, you know, that they use in the commercial pieces.
The different items.
Different items like
Yeah,
that. You
yeah.
know, that would be pretty good.
Right.
But I can still see some of the fellas pulling their nets up. I've done it myself, pulling the nets out of the dory up on the net spreads to dry over the weekend. So it would be much lighter to make a start for the coming week, you know. And they'd have a chance to dry out, and the fish slime would die in them, you know. So. But they were heavily limed, you know.
Right.
Salt water and limed in order to kill the effect of the fish slime on the cotton. Everything was cotton.
Right.
The swine lines all were, it was all cotton. And it would rot out over the weekend if you didn't lime it good enough.
What about, you've talked about what the museum can represent in terms of the past. What can the museum do for the community in the future?
They said that for anybody with any historical interest at all, it would be much greater than someone that couldn't care less, you know, about it. It's up to the individuals, I think, who would really appreciate it. It would do a lot for some people. The museum would, and I'm in there myself. Of course, we've made a number of trips down to check and see how things were coming along.
Right.
And I'd love to see it finished and everything, so I can go down, maybe spend a little while down, you know.
Right.
And I can meet some of the people coming in. You know.
So you could help out and kind of be there for guests, visitors coming to see.
I suppose I could, you know, devote a little while, you know, ever so often, like, you know, welcome them in to our museum,
Right.
you know. Come in, come and watch, look at this, or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you might need to put somebody down there to do
That's a
this.
good suggestion. Someone who's kind of welcoming people.
And
Yeah.
you've just got to see something, so-and-so, you know. And come with me, I'll show you. So they go around and point it out to them.
Yeah.
Oh, man, is that what they used? And it goes back 100 years, you know, so, oh, man.
So people like you who carry a lot of the tradition could help people coming in to understand what those traditions were about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can explain some of it, not in full
Right.
detail,
Right.
but I'd be willing to help
Great.
where
Great.
I
I
can.
bet Karen would be thrilled with that. You hear
Oh,
that,
yeah.
Karen?
Well, I think she already knows this
Yeah.
kind of thing.
What about bringing in local community members to be a part of? That's one way they could be involved. How do you think you could involve more community people?
Well, due to the complete lack of education in you know, on some people, they don't have any education at all. Some of them have very little education, and some might have graduated from NC State. It's hard to say, you know, but considering all that, there's a percentage that wouldn't take part in it to save your life if you were choking.
Really, no matter?
Right.
Yeah.
But thank God that it is a majority that would love to see. You know, they're happy about the location of the museum. They're happy to have it here on the island. That would start whether they had any amount of education or not. You know, but it's his outlook on it. And appreciate all the work that's gone into it. It interests me.
So you think there might be more support than not? That's good to hear.
Than what
Yeah.
actually shows. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And it's really, now she wanted me to
Yeah,
speak.
Barbara, you were pointing something out in the
Yeah, she
scrapbook?
wanted me to speak about the mail being delivered to the island. You know, I've done several of the old mailboats, you know, the replicas. But there's one that I remember. I remember a little something. It's very smoky and foggy between me now and the old Orville G, which preceded Mr. Kelly Willis's pet. His commercial workboat. He just changed. He added on a cabin to a Corsair Rafter and Mackerel Fishery like this, a little higher cabin going on aft, and when he brought passengers back and forth, they'd have a way to get out of the rain, you know. And along with the mail, you know, he brought the mail for a number of years, you know, on the old pet mailboat. And that's the one that she just showed me now. You know.
Is that a favorite one of yours, Barbara?
I just thought it might be interesting, you know.
Yeah.
But they go back now in the late 1800s. The old Beulah, that was a sailing hull that they installed a steam engine to bring the mail from Beaufort over to
Oh, nice.
Harker's Island and Straits and on over to Marshallburg. That brought the mail in. But that was an old round bottom. That could have been a smack. They were short of, or sloop rig that they added steam power to. 1880, in the 1880s. That was one of the earliest mailboats. You know.
Now, would that tradition have a place in the museum, do you think?
It might really work if you had a model of each period of time.
Oh, that's a nice idea.
You know,
Yeah.
had a replica of the old Beulah, a replica of the one preceding the Orville G, and then have a replica of the Orville G, and then finally a replica of the Pet, the last one that ran the mail to the island. I think that would be of interest, and have them lined up on some sort of counter, you know,
Yeah.
behind glass maybe.
Right.
You know, and
How could you get the story in there about the mailboats? How could that be a part of it?
actually, that you know, if you had like a bulletin, a large bulletin board, perhaps, and then have a large picture of each one of them over the top, and then the inscription and what their name and length and whatever, and what power and whatever, you know, that delivered the mail in this number of years. Come on down to the next one, you know,
Right.
and have it. They can just stand there and read it right off. Oh yeah, I see. Yeah, and that would be this one. Oh yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would. I think it would.
Neat. That's a great idea. Any more ideas you would like to offer? I think I've kept you for a long while here. Is there other
That's
suggestions
all right.
for
I'll
the
be
museum?
working out anyway, whatever time it is. Hardly. We pretty well covered a lot of it now, you know. And I remember though when I was just a little fella. I can remember we'll have to say the last of the sail rigs, you know. But I personally have been down to the landing as early as 7 and 8 years old. My mom would let me go down to the water's edge, you know, and I'd look out and see the sails as the boats would come and go. The most outstanding was both the flat bottom sprit sail rig and the dead rise, the shallow big bottom sprit sail rig. That's what we have here is the dead rise sprit sail right here. I've seen all this, them coming and going, you know. In the early morning they have a light iron, very light iron, you know, and they would just mosey along, not enough wind. And I'd watch it a little while, but I had to hurry back. I came back to the house. But later on in the afternoon, I'd go down again, and I noticed that these white dots appeared over on the outer banks, and they got larger as they came whatever they had, and they sell to some of the fish houses, we call it, and unload the today's catch of clams. We've done all this ourselves. So, and we did for 2 summers in the little dip. It was a coarse-time dead rice sprit sale that I did for myself, and we used it 2 summers clams over at Shackleton,
Uh-huh.
and we caught as high as 800 pounds of clams a day. But we looked for the bigger ones because we got paid by weight. We didn't get paid by count. The little select, you know, the nicks
Right.
and the cherry stones are select. Okay, well these were the chowders, you know, and
Right.
we wanted to get more weight so we could make a couple more extra dollars.
And you remember all of that, it sounds like
Oh
really
man,
clearly.
it's like yesterday.
Yeah, what about when you're making these? What do you think about?
Oh man, your mind just goes, you know, it just ventures everywhere. You know, you can maybe it might just flash back to seeing some old fellow from over in Martinburg or somewhere with his rig, you know, and she's really getting it. You know, she's
So you see
Yeah,
you see those scenes as you
little-
work.
Yeah, those little mental pictures keep flashing, you know, and you say, well, wait a minute now, I got to take a little more off of this plank, and it's like that. It's all combined, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm getting during the whole show, I'm getting enjoyment out of what I'm doing. You know. I love what I'm doing.
It'd be neat if you could share that somehow at the museum so that people could see, in a way, what you see,
Well,
you know, or understand a little bit of what you understand.
There's a form of starvation here we're talking about. There's people that would just actually love to see someone actually doing this, you know, which it would be hard to, unless you had a workshop, you know, and then you show him what,
Okay, so
how
would
you
that
make
be a
beer.
recommendation, a
Yeah.
kind of workshop space?
Right, if you had
Someone else talked about that.
an area off to one side, see, you know, where, because you've got shavings and sand and dust and all this stuff, you know, it's
It's
going
part of it. It's got to be there, don't you
yeah,
think?
it's got to be that. You got to have the whole deal, you know.
Yeah.
And you want your benches there placed and chalks and everything, and you lay a plank in it, and you take your joiner and you run all that all down it, see,
Right.
and show them this is the way that we fitted the plank in, you know, all that stuff. And maybe across a couple more horses, you're laying out the shine plank to start another, you know. And you get the 2 identical shine planks made, and then you make your stem lining, and you get that. You have to select the right length on the spreader, and then you have to make your stern starter piece, you know, where the dead rise started. And then you determine how much dead rise will feather out on that piece on the stern. So you say, it's got to be pretty shallow, you know, so you say, well, say 4 inches dead rise middle way, and just feather that taper on out, you know.
Feather
It
the
has to be
taper
grad-
out, yeah.
It's a form of graduation. You graduate, well, a number of frames has to take a little bit off each frame in order for it to feather on out and become the same dead rise as the stern piece. This has got to be, you got to do this prior to even starting the job. That has to be understood what you're going to do.
Can you show that piece of the process, do you think, in the
Yeah,
demonstration?
well, you'd have to build the thing, you know, you'd have
Right.
to literally build the piece right there, you
Yeah,
know.
well,
And
that'd